Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good, good. I wore my Hanuman shirt just for you.
Jai Hanumanji. It's like
I thought
the human from my perspective, the human being.
I thought we could start off a little playful.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, how would you feel about doing a little word association? I'll give you a word.
Sure.
You just give me the
Okay.
first thing that comes to your mind.
Like one word, or doesn't matter what comes
A
out?
word
Or...
or a phrase. A word or a phrase. There's no rules here. There's no rules.
Okay.
Enlightenment.
Identity.
Christ.
Clarity.
U.G. Krishnamurti.
I don't know.
Trungpa Rinpoche.
Hopelessness.
Oh wow, I like that. I I posted a picture of Facebook with him with a gun to his head.
Yeah, I love that picture. It's one of my favorites.
I like this one. Have you seen?
Yeah, this is the ultimate mudra. Yeah. It's saying fuck you to the ego. From the ego to the ego. Fuck the ego. That's what the ego likes to say. Fuck the ego.
Alan Watts said, "There's nothing so egotistical as to try to get rid of the ego."
Yeah, exactly. And he also said that he doesn't trust anybody that doesn't have a hint of rascality, and I like that too. He's a rascal. I love that.
Speaking of rascality, Neem Karoli Baba.
Satchidananda.
Ramdas.
Nobody.
Andrew.
Nobody.
This game might hit a. We might hit a dead end.
I'll just keep saying nobody. He's just I'm stuck on a loop now. Let's see what happens next.
Kundalini.
Bliss.
Shiva Shambho.
Shambho.
All right. Well, I'm going to give you a choice. We can. I can give you a confession, or I can read a poem I wrote and just see your reaction to it. I'll let you decide where we go.
It's up to you.
We'll do both. We'll go confession. The confession is Lance the Seeker used to get quite what's the word? I'll say annoyed with some of Andrew's posts.
Yeah.
The Seeker found a lot of what you said frustrating.
Yes. Good. Yeah.
Do you find that that's is that a common reaction to?
Yes. That's how I reacted as a seeker to words like that. Yeah. So I would see there's nobody here. There's no, and say, what the fuck are you people talking about? What do you mean I don't exist? You're insane. How could you even claim that? What do you mean there's no doer? What is that? Just shirk responsibility? What is that? What is that? And now I know what it is. And I realize what that is. It's just a very clear description of the awakened state.
What is it for a seeker, for you or any other body talking about this, when a seeker intuitively can feel that they're hearing truth, but at the same time it's like they're banging their head against a wall trying to?
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly how I would describe it. It's exactly like banging your head off a brick wall.
Chinese finger trap.
Well, it's like, from the seeker's perspective, it's like they're talking to a brick wall and it won't budge. Well, come on, give me an inch. Come on, the self. Nope. 1% of free will is free will. Nope, nothing. And then from the sage's perspective, there's a brick wall too, and it's the message doesn't want to be heard, no matter how well and how clearly it's spoken. So there's kind of a brick wall in between. There's like some kind of barrier in the seeking mind that actually doesn't want to hear this, actually doesn't want to wake up, and actually it wants more suffering. That's why if you get into a really deep depression, what you'll realize your mind is telling you want more of is more and more and more suffering and more depression, for example.
What do you think
But
about
that's not what you want. Your goal is to end suffering, right? You want enlightenment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me read. You're a songwriter. Well, let me take that back. The Seeker, Andrew the Seeker, was a songwriter, correct?
Yeah, I haven't written anything after awakening. It's kind of interesting. It's like I needed it to feel enough. I needed it to feel like if I'm a rock star, I'll feel like I'm enough. That's part of it. Part of it's also that I was trying to clearly express the same stuff, just the seeker's idea of what awakening is. In other words, before awakening, I rambled on and on and on about awakening and hadn't experienced it yet. And I knew that. I knew that I hadn't experienced it yet. And then after awakening, it's the same shit. It's still the mad rambler rambling on and on about enlightenment. It's just very, very clear now. There's just a detectable clarity.
I think it's beautiful. Like somebody like Nancy who just writes poetry from that spot, and it's so beautiful, and it hits a spot. But there's something beautiful about a something written as a seeker. That
Yeah.
seeking
Yeah.
energy can bring something as well.
Definitely. Yeah. I love both perspectives. It would be really boring if all there were seekers in the world. It would be really boring if everyone was a sage. None of this would function. None of this would work. The interesting thing is the interplay, the juxtaposition between sage and seeker, or the way it's talked about in ancient Indian, or no, let me just rephrase that. A way to put it is it's kind of like, imagine if you had a bicycle, and it's the type of bicycle where you can't put a back wheel in the front and you can't put a front wheel in the back, and you desperately need both to ride a bike.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like that. If there's a seeker and a sage doing something, there's nowhere they can't go. There's nothing they can't do. There's an actual sparkling functioning of some kind that requires both this type of play, the play of relationship, lila type of thing.
Well, on that note, let me read a poem. I don't know why, but I wanted to get your opinion on this specific poem. I didn't write it with you in mind, but after I wrote it, I thought, I'm just curious what you thought. All right.
Okay. Yeah.
Neo Advaita police be damned. I am a dripping wet bhakti. It's
Yeah.
all just a story, and my story is grace. Would you rather taste the sweetness or be the sugar? Both.
Yes.
Don't listen to me. I speak nonsense, but Maharaji sorts it all out. Yes, I get it. Nobody here, nothing to do, nowhere to go. And yet here I am, doing and going. Neem Karoli Baba sorts it all out. Pay me no mind. Wake up, praise God, open my heart, love and write about it. Playing with dolls in perfect peace.
Yeah. That's the last part, especially. I call, I don't know how to put it. It's like a remembering from eons ago. It's like a memory of being the Tao. I don't know how to explain it, but like, for example, there's these, I don't know what you would call them exactly, these rememberings, these lingerings, I don't know how to put it, that trickle into our ordinary world that seem very obvious to me. Like little boys play with action figures, little girls play with dolls, or you might play The Sims or something. And what that is what's going on, right? It's almost like from the perspective of God, if you will. It's like, yeah, we're all just little things that are being moved, and temporarily the force is identified with them, but there's nobody in there. There's nobody in there. So you're like an action figure or a doll of God, if you will. Except God isn't a person. It's a mysterious force we can't even talk about.
Yeah.
It's not an individual person. It's not it. It's the mysterious Tao that can't be named or spoken of, type of thing.
We could sit here until we're blue in the face talking about it. We'll never touch it.
Well,
we can hint at it.
That level, yeah.
I see and this isn't directed at you necessarily, but a lot of in the Neo Advaita, there's a tendency to bash the idea of a guru, and
Yeah.
I can see I see the beauty in that. Like I see okay, but I'm wondering
Yeah.
if there's a baby that's in that bathwater that's being so freely.
Sure. I mean, the only difference between a sage and a guru is that a guru is pandering to the delusions of the self, and a sage isn't. So, in other words, you'd rather be around your guru. The sage is going to tell you things that are far more uncomfortable.
So if the guru is a mirror, what is the sage?
A broken mirror. In other
Oh,
words,
oh,
yeah.
oh.
So a guru says, "Hey, look, you're the self," and the sage says, "There's no self. You don't exist as a separate entity apart from the grand totality of nature. No, you don't exist as such. There is no separation. So how could a separate self exist?" And the true self, if you want to look at it that way, right? Buddha nature is emptiness, clarity, awareness, all merged together inseparably. So you're looking for the true self, and there isn't one because there is no individual, there is no someone up there. It's not like that. You're not a someone now. And because you think you're a someone, you're suffering. And because you're suffering, you're seeking. And so when some of these speakers say, call off the search, stop seeking, that's total bullshit. Total bullshit. Because you can't. It,
Yeah.
the suffering is what's fueling the seeking. That's why the seeker is seeking to begin with, because it thinks it's somebody, it thinks it needs something it doesn't already have, and therefore it's suffering. When the me spontaneously vanishes, and it was never there to begin with, when the me is spontaneously realized to have never been there, never was there any separation. When that is spontaneously realized, there's nobody left to suffer. And because there's no suffering, there's no seeking. Because what you're seeking is your own absence. What a seeker is seeking is their own absence. What a seeker is seeking is the end of suffering.
It's so frustrating as a seeker
It's
to
supposed to be.
in one
Nancy
breath
even said that to me once. She said, or I think it was in her, Nancy was interviewed at Boot at the Gas Pump with Rick Archer, and she said in the interview, she said, well, part of my role as a sage is to frustrate the seeker. And there's definitely an element of truth to that. There's like a Goldilocks zone. If the seeker is too frustrated, they'll probably kill themselves. If they're not frustrated enough, they'll never find it because they're not trying to find it. It's like you have to engage the entire apparatus, and yet it can't be found in the same way that water and food can be found, or it's not something someone can do seemingly within this kind of neocortical activity of the mammal brain, the ape brain, the human brain. Humans have a much more, the outside of the brain, the neocortex. Human beings have much thicker neocortex, which gives the illusion of a self, the illusion of free will. And it's nice that there seems to be someone here. It's nice that there seems to be free will, but there's nobody here and there's no free will. And therefore, there's no doer or non-doer. And yet everything gets done. There's still a doing. Doing happens. There's just no doer doing it, if you will.
So the doer, I mean, does this ring true to you? The quote Ramesh Balsekar used to say that we're just genes and up to date conditioning.
Yeah.
That's what we are.
Within a dream. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're being programmed by the exquisite interplay of nature's majesty. It's not like you know it's not like you were a half-assed creation. There's in the same way that there's entropy, there's also the opposite of entropy occurring, and we might call that kundalini shakti energy, which is the negentropic principle of order. So there's an order and a chaos merged that's doing a functioning that we call the dream of the universe. And yet there's 8 billion separate dreams in each of these dream machines we call a human brain. And it's not just the brain, it's the entire human body. It's the entire human body. There's a one functioning whole. If I cut you in half, the functioning would stop. And the entire universe is just one whole that can't be cut in half. It's just functioning within a dream. It's a dream of all that. There's actually nothing is actually happening. There's no time or space or matter.
Were you hesitant at any point to talk about kind of Kundalini and mystical experiences? I think that's
and I feel like I was conditioned by the radical non-dual community not to talk about those things, and then something snapped in me, and I thought, no, there's an urge to speak these things, and there's people looking for these things, and I have to apparently be the one to clarify that, and juxtapose those experiences against each other too, because a lot of people will have a Kundalini awakening and they're still suffering and they're still seeking. Have a Merkaba experience and they're still seeking, they're still suffering. And then liberation finally occurs, awakening, enlightenment, the non-dual shift in perspective finally occurs. And then there's no one left to suffer, and suffering ends and seeking ends. So it's important to talk about those. It actually does a service to those non-dual communities for me to talk about it, because I'm talking about it in a manner that, Kundalini can give you glimpses of this, but that may not be a good, helpful thing. A glimpse might frustrate you even more. I got it and I lost it. I had it for 10 minutes and I saw the body was moving on its own. And now I think I'm somebody doing something again. Boy, that's almost more frustrating than if you didn't have a taste of it on a certain level. Is that going to increase or decrease the likelihood of a suicide or something like that? I have no idea.
Yeah. My first, my story is a lot of, I got it, and oh fuck, where'd it go? Kind of that thing.
I had a lot of those little mini Satori type experiences that seem huge at the time. Like, oh, this is enlightenment. Oh fuck, where'd it go? Yeah. It kind of oscillates. Sometimes you get a glimpse of that. You'll get pulled back before time and experience something for a moment, and then you'll return in a way where where did it go? It was just here. It's like the veil comes back over. Yeah. So I've had multiple little glimpses like that, and at the time they were huge. They were probably some of the biggest experiences up until that moment. And so on a certain level, that's what keeps driving the babble about awakening prior to it, because you are getting little glimpses of it. You might not exactly get the taste of chocolate that we're talking about, and can't be described unless you've tasted it. But you talk to someone like me, and maybe you'll get the smell of chocolate. It's not the taste of chocolate. You don't know what it tastes like, but there's that. What is that? I get the aroma of that. Or you might get a little tiny nibble of it, but you want the whole bar type of deal. And and then once you eat the whole bar, you don't want any more. Makes you kind of,
yeah.
You already. It's like when you are starving and the food tastes so good and you just ravenously eat it, and then you ate too much and you're full and you're like, oh, I don't ever want to look at food again. It's like the seeking stopped. You're not looking for more food after 2 Thanksgiving meals. You're not looking for food at that point. This is just different. This isn't something that can be found in the world. This isn't the thing in the world that can be found, like water or food or shelter. And the mammal brain is so used to that working for everything that it assumes that logical choosing doership mind can find enlightenment, but it can't. So there's some, I don't know what you want to call it, spiritual intelligence. There's some apparatus through which the seeker can detect the subtle. And from the seeker's perspective, and seekers tend to be intelligent. That's why they're, probably partly contributes to their suffering. Even the more intelligent you are, the more you suffer. If you suffer enough, you're going to look for the resolution to that. If you're on fire, you're going to probably pat it out at very least, type of thing. So I forget where I was going with that.
Would you Could you ever see yourself offering advice on a method of any sort?
So I am aware of what seem to be a set of methods for things like a Kundalini awakening or a body of light type of experience, which may give you little glimpses of this state. But for the actual permanent shift that we call awakening or enlightenment, that non-dual shift in perspective um, that occurs for nobody, wherein suffering ends, there's no method for that, because that's the neocortical activity of a self-aware mammal trying to find water. And yet this isn't like water. This doesn't have a physicality or a solidity that can be found in that way. It's not like a brick or a fruit. It's and we've evolved to be looking for those types of things. But it's only the human being that has that unique urge to know and understand things. It only is seeking to know and understand things because it's perceiving suffering. And it thinks that if it knows and understands more, that it can experience bliss instead of suffering. And so the seeker tends to say things like, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I understand. I know, I understand. And the sage says things like, I don't know. Because knowing everything is hell and knowing nothing is paradise.
For me, there's such a freedom when there were no more questions, or there are no more answers needed, no more questions.
Yeah, when you're experiencing bliss, you're not seeking.
Yeah.
When you're experiencing suffering, you think, okay, there's got to be a method. What do I do? There's
Yeah.
no you. There's no doer. There's no method. That's how the seeking ego mind thinks. It's so used to that type of script running that it's all it knows. Because it works for everything else, why wouldn't it work for this? The seeker thinks to itself, well, I'm probably a genius. I could figure this out.
Yeah.
And most seekers are intelligent. And that's part of the nature of it, is that actually this state isn't like intelligence. Surprise, it's not. The animals are not suffering. Like if you watched a cat torture a mouse to death, you wouldn't be judging the cat. You'd be sitting there and you'd think, okay, the cat has evolved to, that's just how cats are. Okay, I understand. And you have to understand though that mouse, even though it's being played with and tortured to death right before your eyes, it's not suffering. So the mind has this propensity to like judge the cat. Like, why are you torturing that poor mouse to death? You psychopath cat. What the fuck? And then you project to the mouse, oh my God, that poor thing must be suffering so much. It's still alive. The cat's torturing it like it's a toy. It must be in so much pain. It must be suffering. Oh my God. It's probably suffering. And really, you are suffering, but the mouse isn't. And so suffering only occurs in the mind, and you're suffering. The mouse is in pain, but it's not suffering. And again, you're projecting onto that. The mouse doesn't know it's a mouse. The mouse doesn't know it's alive. The mouse doesn't know there's such a thing as bodily death, even. There's just a set of programmed reactions, and the body is spontaneously behaving. If you take the laser pointer, the cat's going to follow it. It doesn't have a choice. Neither do you.
Do you still suffer?
No, there's nobody here. No, suffering ended. I would feel like I'm lying to your face and deceiving you if I said I've suffered it all in the past 4 years.
Is it nothing or is it everything?
The way Tony Parsons put it, which I kind of like, he said, the nothing is hiding in plain sight as everything. So emptiness is masquerading as form, if you will, and yet they're not separate. So emptiness is relative to form, and form is relative to emptiness, and yet there's no relativity within the one whole. You can't compare one apple to itself. And it's kind of like that, which doesn't make sense to the logical mind. So in a sense, sages speak nonsense. That's why, and the seekers are like, yeah, that's nonsense. I want it to make sense. Like, yeah, well, that's the problem. It's not that the sage is misspeaking. It's not that they could polish up their delivery. They already have. The seeker just doesn't want to hear the actual keys to its own freedom. And you are freedom itself. It's not like you need the keys to freedom. You already are freedom. All enlightenment is realizing you've been freedom all along, and everyone and everything and all of everything and all of everyone is just this grand, unified, seamless whole that is freedom itself. It is this limitless nature.
Does it contradict non-duality to pray and worship?
Yeah.
Hmm. Do all actions contradict non-duality?
Nothing contradicts non-duality. There's no contradiction within non-duality. There's no, upon awakening to the non-dual state, there is no paradox. There are no riddles anywhere to be found. It's all immediately answered. Every riddle is seen right through. Every paradox is no longer seen as a riddle, but rather just a manifested completion. So one way to say that is like there's a coin and you can only see one side of the coin at a time, but that's okay because you're the entire coin at all times. You're never not the whole coin. You don't even have to see it. You don't even have to awaken. If you were really deeply, deeply awakened, everybody would appear as an awakened non-being. Everything would appear as awakening itself. Everything is liberation. Everything is freedom. It's just impossible to see from the mind's perspective, from the individual me, and it's frustrating as hell if the me doesn't get what it wants. And the only method I can use to help awaken somebody is just to help starve their sense of self until it dies of starvation. And that's where that frustration comes. Yeah, but I'm hungry for the thing that, yeah, well, I'm starving you to death so that you are liberated.
Was that seeking energy really painful for the character prior to awakening?
Intensely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you find
Yeah.
yourself really empathizing with seekers these days?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I know. It's funny because the seeker thinks on a certain level, like, oh, the sage can't understand where I'm coming from. Yeah, of course they can. They've been through it. That's what this is. That's why you're seeking. That's why you began this path to begin with. You were suffering deeply, so of course we remember that. But yeah, yeah, absolutely. I suffered very, very, very intensely. I Yeah.
I don't know why this is coming to me, but just something that Maharaj or Neem Karoli Baba said to Ram Dass when Ram Dass wanted to. There was a horrible bus crash, and he was really upset about it. And Neem Karoli Baba said, "Can't you see it's all perfect?" And
Yeah,
Ram Dass
exactly.
realized that there is a possibility of having that view, having that total view of
Exactly.
perfection, but at the same time, like your fucking heart is breaking too, and you know it's
So yeah, in that sense, the sage, the awakened perspective, like, I don't know how to put it. Uh, that heartbreak is still there, but it doesn't hurt us. Is the best way I could put it. It's like on another level, there's a cold detachedness. There's like some almost sociopathic view there, where it's like, yeah, I really don't care. Everything's perfect, and I can see that, and that too is perfect, and so is your kind of urge to make it more perfect by alleviating that suffering. So yeah, it's hard to explain, but there's overlaps between increased empathy and, so in other words, upon awakening, it seems like I got infinitely more sensitive and infinitely less sensitive at the same time. It's like sensitivity was no longer an issue at all, one way or the other. So became more sensitive in the sense of like a Jedi is force sensitive, more sensitive in that sense, where you can detect all the subtlety and you can detect all the flavors of relative experiences. And yeah, I still feel for the seeker. Um, and yet if I was too caught up in that sensitivity, I wouldn't be able to help. It's kind of like a doctor doing brain surgery or trying to save somebody from choking or something. What if they just panicked? Oh, then they wouldn't be able to help them. So there's like the fact that a sage is a little cold and detached actually allows them to step into a really deep suffering and say, okay, no, it's okay. I'm not running. I can see this. I'm gonna look at it. Everything's fine. I can, we're gonna do everything we can to alleviate that suffering.
It's like doctors who can't detach themselves at least a little bit. They get burned out too quick. If
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
too
Exactly.
in it, you can't be like every single patient and
Yeah, I
every
mean
day.
every single seeker is suffering intensely. So a non-dual speaker is, for a living, they're talking to suffering itself. And if that bothered them, they wouldn't be able to keep doing that. They would get
Yeah,
burned out almost immediately. So the fact that there's a cold, detached aloofness and an even warmer, now I can finally love everybody vibe. It's kind of both at the same time. It's the best of both worlds is the best way to explain it. Whatever
yeah.
question you have next, awakening is the best of both worlds for that given concept because the duality isn't there anymore. So
Who were some of Andrew's favorite teachers, speakers, guru, whatever when you were seeking?
I mean, I've kind of just tasted it all like it's a buffet, I just went in, oh, it's that. I tried it all, I looked at it all, I tasted it all. I like crazy wisdom. I like Trungpa. I like Ram Dass and things like that. I like Alan Watts. Bodhidharma really resonated with me. Buddha obviously, but Bodhidharma really resonated with me. The Linji tradition of Zen, the Rinzai tradition of Zen, the Vajrayana tradition, Sogchen tradition. It's hard to say because I just was just so appetized by everything that. By the way, where are we with time right now? I can't check my clock on this thing yet.
We're looking at 3:29.
Okay, good. Yeah, just remind me if we're like 5 minutes to the hour and I haven't said anything. Try to tip me off if you
Okay, I got you.
can. But
Hold it back this time.
yeah, teachers. I looked at things from so many different angles. My mind was always such a way that I tried to, as a seeker, I always tried to use my intelligence in a way that I tried to look at every situation from 16 different angles at the same time. It's like, okay, what would a reductionist, material scientist, neuroscience think of this? Okay, what would a pure spiritualist think of this? Okay, what would the biologist think of this? Okay, what would the physicist think of this? What would the psychologist think of this? And it just keeps going between these different, all at once, these 16 different perspectives. And if you could see a given topic from those different angles, you start to get a better and better and bigger picture of what that even is. And so that's what my mind would naturally do, just cycle through these perspectives to try to get a bigger picture view of it. And so the same thing would happen with systems and traditions and so-called teachers. It would just kind of cycle through all these different systems. Okay, Kriya Yoga, Zen, Vajrayana, Dzogchen, Taoism, it keeps doing that. Oh, okay. Hari Krishna. Okay. It keeps, Bhakti, jhana, is just whatever it is. Um, whatever angle I could look at it from. Okay, maybe this angle will give me a better perspective. Okay, maybe this angle will give me but really, we call it a shift in perspective, but really enlightenment is no perspectives, perspectivelessness, no reference points, no limited tunnel vision. I don't know how to put that. It's just the whole thing all at once. And from that perspective, there's nobody here because there's no one, there's no individual. How could there be separation? How could there be two of us? I think the seeker can understand that there's a oneness. I think they get that intellectually and can even feel that and have glimpses of that. But that still doesn't click into place that if there's only a oneness, there can't be a you and me. There can't be two of us. And yet this world is kind of like a fantasy of every possible self and other at the same time. And the juxtaposition of all those relativities within this one greater absolute.
I heard you with your interview with Emerson, and something really beautiful. It's something that I can relate to, and it also reminded me of Ramakrishna. You said as a seeker, you would convince yourself of each religion for a week and
Yeah.
fully dive into Judaism, and then that's I can relate to that.
Yeah, when I did that, I'm just guessing, but probably around 14 or something like that when I went through that. And it still happens even now, the kind of, I think the seeker and the sage have that in common, the kind of comparative religion bend, because from the seeker's perspective, they're trying to find the one true religion that'll really clearly explain all this. And from the awakened perspective, it's like, oh yeah, it's none of those. And yet they all kind of had a little hint of a taste of certain facets of this greater whole. And so like, yeah, Jesus said this, Buddha said this, it's the same. Yeah, but the seeker thinks like, oh, there's got to be one system out there that's correct and nailed this and can be put into words and put conceptually in a way that this mind can understand it and know it and become enlightened and know everything. But knowing everything would be hell. So that's not enlightenment. Enlightenment is no longer needing to know or understand anything. In other words, the reason the mind wants to know and understand is to solve the problem it perceives. There's no problem. The only problem is that it's seeking to try to correct perfection. How are you going to correct perfection? It's already perfect. The ego thinks, well, if I was really God, for example, I would have done it differently. No, you wouldn't have. That's the part you don't understand. It's exactly perfectly the way you would have done it if you were a doer magically as a person up in the sky, which you're not. But if you were, you would have done this exactly precisely as it is.
Alan
So
Watson
it's
used to say that if you were God and you could do anything, first you'd dream and conquer all your desires and do all that, but at some point you'd want uh, randomness and excitement and danger. And he said eventually
yeah.
you'd end up Andrew would end up
Yes.
here talking with me, and I'd end up here
Yeah.
talking with Andrew.
Exactly. So
What God would do.
from that, another way to talk about it would be that and this is me pandering to the seeking mind a little bit, but I think it'll be easy to understand this way. Your nature is so free, so insanely limitless that you rejoice when there seems to be limits. You rejoice if you get trapped for a moment. Oh wow, I could even suffer. Tremendous. Seeker doesn't want to hear that part, but the seeking mind can understand this. I think that your nature is so limitless that you actually rejoice in being enslaved and trapped in the matrix and banging on the walls to get out. You like that about it because, oh boy, you can even experience what it's like to not be limitless because you're so fucking limitless. You're so limitless, so free that you rejoice in not seeming that way for a moment. It's really hard to explain, but then the relief of that, the relief of it's not even a transcending or an escaping. That's not it at all. It's just the way you see the world changes. So the world looks like hell You look around and you think, maybe the Gnostics were onto something in a way. Like, this is not the real world. This is hell, and I'm trapped here, and I should be doing something to get out of here. Maybe they had a point. But from the awakened perspective, this has always been paradise. There's no such thing as a real world. All realities are virtual. Everything that could ever be experienced is a dream. Is it real or is it unreal? Well, it's as real as a dream. A movie is as real as a movie.
Yeah.
A movie isn't totally meaningless, and yet these are just characters, and you're weeping and laughing, and oh boy, I got the chills on that scene. Yeah, well, it's a movie the whole time, and yet you get lost for a moment in it as the characters. You forget you're an audience member in that flow state. You become the characters on the screen for a moment. And as you lose yourself in that, you kind of enter the flow state. And that flow state that athletes talk about, or musicians or dancers talk about, that is the awakened state. That's what the animals are in all the time. It's just human beings that go in and out of that. And when they're not in it, they suffer.
For you, did the inner critic die with the seeking
Yes.
energy? Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Does it ever creep its head up just
Like for like a nanosecond, and then it's kind of like, oh, that's funny that the mind still can do that.
It can't
Like,
get
oh
you.
wow, yeah, it can't bite me. There's no self judgment. There's no good boy, bad boy reinforcements. There's no like I rejoice in being the villain. Even like, it's hard to explain. But it's like people go, oh, you're a bodhisattva. You're a hero of compassion. And it's like, well, yeah, but I can also be the villain. Not like I'm gonna go do a shitty thing and be an evil person. Not like that. Just like, I don't know what you would call it exactly. It's not narcissism, but there's some element of comfortability. There's some element of like, you know, on a certain level, somebody who's like a narcissist or a psychopath, they're probably not suffering quite as much. They're probably frustrated because they can't access higher brain functioning, like compassion, for example. So that part, they probably feel stuck like a brilliant 16-year-old for the rest of their lives. But a sage doesn't have that problem either. So it's kind of, again, it's kind of like the best of every world all at once.
Where do we go from here? You have any questions for me? Any curiosities?
I don't know. But I do feel that there's some subtle energetic transmission that occurs too.
I was gonna. Wow, that's funny. You should mention that. I only wrote down like 3 questions preparing for this. That was my great preparation for. And one of them had to do with that.
More than I had. I'm always winging it. That's kind of the point. It's like I'm an interface between the personal and the cosmic.
When you presented,
Use me.
Yeah. When you presented the possibility of this being on YouTube, it was at first what I would describe as a really intimidating energy, but then I was able to look at it a little different. Like, no, that's just excitement. Like, don't call that.
Yeah.
Don't call
Yeah.
that.
In psychology, there's something called the Schachter two-factor theory of emotion. Basically, what that means is like the way human beings interpret emotions and physiological responses are such that if your heart rate elevated, you could interpret that many different ways. You go, oh, I'm excited. Oh, I'm excited. Or you could go, oh, I'm angry. Fuck this guy. I'm angry. I'm angry. All it is the mind interpreting, oh, the heart rate was slightly elevated. And it's crazy. It's spooky that the mind can go in any direction with that. Something so simple. And it's been proven that this is the case by science. So it's kind of scary in a way that your whole world is basically composed of bullshit misinterpretations on a certain level. Um, And yet, if you could see through that a little bit, you can start to kind of see through that a little more. So it's like, oh, I'm angry? No, no, no. I remember that thing. It's just my heart rate. Okay, I had a little too much coffee. Okay, take a deep breath. Okay, it's just the heart rate. Oh, okay. The heart rate is elevated. That's what's occurring. Oh, okay. That's all it is. At that point, there's no interpretation. So if you're metacognitively aware of certain processes within the human organism, you can kind of transcend some of the mistranslations, perhaps, of the physiological responses turning into emotions to begin with, which is very strange, but it can be potently helpful to know things like that you can kind of detect, not cause and effect necessarily, but you can detect the interplay of how the mind, or the best way I used to put it and still do, or as a seeker I put it this way, but I'd also put it this way now. It's easy to get the wrong idea. You know, um, it's so easy to get the wrong idea. People translate things so many different ways. Someone could get up on stage and say something, and there's 100 audience members, and they all hear 100 different things. So again, it's kind of like what Jesus said: "Let they who have ears hear." If you can detect or hear it to that extent, it'll be helpful. And yet, the mind technically doesn't want to hear this. If I were to go into a purely radical non-dual conversation at this point, the tendency of the mind would be to end the call, and it would be to, for whatever excuse it gives or whatever distraction or whatever story, as long as it avoids the call, its mission is complete. It doesn't care what story it feeds you to get that done. Well, I got to feed my cat. Well, I can't talk right now. Well, my house is burning down because I accidentally kicked a candle over. Whatever it is, the brain is programmed, the self rather, is programmed in such a way that it wants to maintain its own seeming existence. It wants the illusion to continue, because it'll help increase the survival of the body. But from your perspective, what that means is that you are going to suffer, and you're going to continue to suffer. And so even though people tend to want to avoid the radically non-dual conversations, those are most likely the most potently helpful, most clearly spoken. It's actually what the seeker is looking for. It's all the answers. They just close their ears and go, la, 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 I don't like that. I'm going to go look for something else. So when you finally find the true guru, if you will, they're going to look like a very ordinary sage, but to you, it's going to appear as the most ordinary person you've ever met. Some feeble old man who's just the most, and you're going to be like, yeah, but are there some other big teachers around here? And he'll go, oh yeah, there's some huge teachers around here. And then you're going to go to them instead of the very ordinary guy who actually could have given you that thing you were looking for. So that's interesting too. The mind actually is programmed not to find what it thinks it's seeking. I don't know how to get someone to see through that.
Do you notice in the spiritual marketplace of non-duality, do you notice the message can become dogmatic for some people?
Yeah, there's a type of fundamentalism that is poisoning that community.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wrote that poem was kind of in response to that.
Yeah, the best way I can explain it is the radical non-dual message is one of an uncompromising, starving the self message, and yet at the same time there's things that it chooses to avoid talking about, just like the seeker does. There's certain sages that will use these clever little gimmicks to avoid direct questions and to avoid certain areas of this inquiry. And I would rather just look at it all and whatever arises, we can look at it. Wherever we go, we can go together, and a type of radical honesty in that domain, instead of hiding and playing gimmicks and playing it safe and being a chicken shit about it, just to maintain the oh well, I want to stay on the pedestal. A lot of some speakers kind of fall into that on a certain level of either not wanting to talk about, but then on the other side, it's like there's a wisdom to it, not wisdom, but there's a reason, not a reason, but words are funny. But the sage is sometimes they're doing it just because it could easily give the seeker the wrong idea, and it would perhaps keep them seeking longer and in the wrong directions. And so I understand the appropriateness of that too. And so we're all a little different. Each speaker is a little different, and it's kind of hilarious to me how each speaker, including myself, on some level is trying to maintain some level of individuality and uniqueness in their own expression of this, which is hilarious. A non-dual speaker who's telling me there's no individuality is still trying to maintain some individuality within their unique message. What the hell is that?
How common do you think it is for somebody to for a seeker to get into non-duality and kind of learn the language and maybe convince themselves that they are at a certain state that they're in fact not in, and kind of just by with the syntax and word games just able to kind of live in that spot for a long time? Is that something you've noticed?
Yeah, not really, but every once in a while, but not really. But what that is, we call them parrots. Polly, want a cracker? Like, do you understand what you're saying? It's like it's just repeating words. You do that with a parrot. The parrot doesn't know what it's saying. It's the same thing. They don't know what they're talking about. But oh, there's nobody here. Blah blah blah. Like, but the seeker isn't really that inclined to do that. And so we don't really see it that often. And when we do, it's like, oh, okay. And like, it's pretty easy to figure out if it's a parrot or a sage, if you will. But from the sage's perspective, anyway, from the seeker's perspective, maybe they'd be tricked by that. But I don't see that as like a rampant problem in that community, because I don't think a seeker would want to do that. A seeker would find those words distasteful and they'd run away from them and they say, that's not it. Fuck that. Those people, ugh, it's over here. It's this other thing. It's the true self. It's they don't want to go there. They flee from that. So I don't see why they would even have a motive to mimic that unless it was their lived experience usually. And there are probably a couple people that maybe are parrots and don't know what they're saying, and they're just copy pasting the words because they know that it's some popular trend or something. But I've never really personally encountered that as a big problem in that community or anything. No. So most likely, if someone's talking from that perspective reliably and clearly, there's a pretty good chance they've gone through that shift in perspective, because there's really no reason to talk from that perspective unless you have. You would actually find it wrong. You'd want to argue with it unless you've actually go, oh, this is it. Like that's how I was for years. I'd be like, fuck this. This isn't it. That's not it. Keep going. No, that's not it. That can't be it. What do you mean I don't exist? There's no doer. Yeah, right. I even coined a term when I was a seeker. I thought I was so brilliant. I thought that was a good thing. Brilliant. When I was a seeker, I coined a term and I called it meta non-duality.
Do explain.
Beyond non-duality. Yeah, exactly. Do explain. I gotta hear this. Let me get some popcorn. Here, I got the popcorn. All right, now start. Oh yeah. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, let me record this. Let me put this on YouTube. I thought I was brilliant, and I thought that was a good thing. And I thought meta non-duality. I'm beyond all that shit. And then then I actually woke up.
Yeah.
And then oh, now all that shit makes sense. Now I'm saying it. Trippy.
So
I
when
was
that
the
shift
frustrated
happened,
seeker that was pushing that away. That's how I know exactly what's going on, because I was in that community fighting against it. This isn't it. Fuck this. You the people don't know. You just. And now I'm a non-duality speaker. It's hilarious. So yeah, the sage usually understands the plight of the seeker quite well and finds it
yeah,
almost amusing that the seeker doesn't realize that. Yeah, we've suffered tremendously. Trust me. Trust me on that. It wasn't real.
Suffering,
But we thought it was real at the time.
my story.
Hmm?
Yeah. I was just saying suffering was a big part of my story.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
suicide attempts in my history, and
Yeah.
it was that seeking energy just it almost it almost you know it
Yeah,
almost
that's
got
the
me.
thing. Yeah, that's the thing. I spoke to somebody today and they said, in all likelihood, you should probably, if you do make a website and you're going to be doing this for a living, you should probably put a legal disclaimer on there that says, I'm not responsible for whatever happens due to the conversation, the effect it has, etc. Because, on a certain level, enlightenment is deadly. And this whole game of seeking and finding and hiding and seeking, this whole game is, it's dangerous in a way because it's such a delicate thing that we're doing. And
Yeah,
that's
when
why the
I
appropriateness of the context, being groomed for the appropriateness, is so important. If someone wants to become a teacher, they damn well better be groomed for the appropriateness of how to not cause more harm and indeed end suffering. And there's no guarantee in that realm. So there's a type of courage even now to talk to a bunch of people. Because again, if you, again, it's kind of like what I said. If you get a glimpse, it could backfire. It could make you more frustrated because you got it and then lost it. And now you know how good it is and you lost it. There's so many things. There's so many ways this could go, and there's plenty of people that there's all kinds of like stepping stones along the path to this, and there's a lot of suffering and bliss oscillating back and forth, really intense suffering and really intense bliss back and forth, like a yo-yo or a pendulum, until finally it just stops.
Are you still reading the Ken Wilber book?
No.
It fell away.
This is not happening. I don't know. I read like
Yeah.
10, 20 pages and I was like,
You
I
enjoy
mean,
reading non-duality since the shift? Do you enjoy reading non-duality?
what do you mean by that?
Do you I mean, do you still like reading books about non-duality, about enlightenment?
The best way I can explain it is instead of reading books now, I'm planning on writing them.
Mm.
So I'm writing a book more than I'm reading one, type of deal. So I'm working on my own first book right now. And it's basically just about my experiences and the plight of the seeker and the what it's like on both sides of that equation, and just kind of the big milestone experiences that I think are somehow directly or indirectly tied to this whole process, if you will.
I just finished my first manuscript on a poetry book, and I used to hear this all the time, and it bothered me, but it wrote itself. quite quite
Yeah,
literally,
yeah,
little to do with it. You know what I mean?
exactly. And there's actually you know my friend Fernando and I were just talking about this the other day. Basically, like, from the awakened perspective, there's more procrastination because there's no doership, and yet everything gets done. It's like there's almost a lazier vibe, and yet from the outside perspective, like, wow, why are you working so hard? Like, oh, I thought I was just enjoying my leisure time. Weird. It's like this right now. It's like, well, why do you do this? Like, because I inherently enjoy it. It's selfish. Well, aren't you trying to help people and stuff? Yeah, that too. That's nice. Yeah. Wasn't there some energetic transmission too? Yeah, that's kind of nice. Yeah.
We're reaching our time. How would you feel about ending with some more word association?
Sure, sure. Yeah, sounds good. I like that. That's a good idea. I like.
The Beatles.
Oh boy, ocean.
Beautiful. Bob Dylan.
Standing on the corner.
Ramana.
Next.
That's about our time, man. That flew by, man.
All right, man. Yeah, it sure did. Time flies when you're having fun. I appreciate you, man.
Yeah,
It was good talk.
It was really
Hope we
good.
talk again soon.
Really good talk. Hanuman says hi.
Jai Hanumanji. The human
Jai
friend.
Gurudev. Hey, this was a pleasure, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you. Have a great day, man.
All right, man. You too.